The the good thing is a couple of things have been already shared, so it'll make this a lot easier. Just give you a context of where the grant came for us. We already are working on NIH-funded HIV study. One of the strengths of our study is in the state of South Carolina, we have everyone who's ever been data on everyone who's ever been infected with HIV. So we don't have a sample, and we have longitudinal data on their health utilization and characteristics. So we have a very robust data set that is linked at the individual level, and we get unique identifiers from our honest brokers. So our goal was to, even with that, look at an ethical framework guided tool that would help in assessing bias, and that's what we set out to do. You'll see a common theme here with the NIST guidance on both bias and fairness, which is a challenge we have. And that's a challenge for the field because it comes from two different directions. So if you take a technological solution, you focus more on the biases. If you take a broad justice solution or viewpoint from an ethics perspective, then you take fairness. And then you combine both of them to a bias and fairness assessment and how that works out. You've seen this most recently through Rena's great presentation, so I won't spend much time on it. But our goal was to use in our model the robustness of the data that we have for EHR, particularly for HIV and other infectious diseases, and project it to other diseases. So from the context of measuring bias and fairness for evaluating EHR as a useful data set. So the big challenge is how do you frame this without just looking at the technological pieces, and how do you frame this in the right way? Because oftentimes, and just keep in mind, I said we have very robust data set. I'll come back to showing you where some of those blinders come up in front of researchers that we might not be aware of, and looking at what data is missing, what do we not have, all of some of the issues that are there. So framing the problem becomes the biggest challenge, right? It depends on where you start. So NIST started with the end, saying, look, if we're building the model, let's correct the issues in the model. So we do all the bias correction standard techniques that we have. And so it starts with your bias assessments, and that essentially drives the technological solution that you use. So we do that through techno-solutionism, and you look at the AI process governance that are severely lacking. After we went through this, our guidance came on the other direction, because if you start from the context of justice and you set that as the overriding criteria, and then you build your fairness model in there, then it should start at the start, even before the data was collected, pre-data, how the data was collected, what are all the issues that will come up at the end. So we start with beginning fairness assessment and driving that as a solution. The challenge with that is what defines fairness. So it's not just the fairness metrics that we use, but if you look at it from a justice perspective, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And then oftentimes we throw the kitchen sink and all types of techniques and methods at it, but still doesn't get to everything. So it's how do we trace back between both processes. So again, this is a model that we looked at after we went through this, and we came up with thinking about just outcomes. And just outcomes are those outcomes that essentially are capturing both fairness and bias in the right way. So we have here a Venn diagram that shows all the biases, just outcomes. The bottom, you have unfair biases embedded or nested in all of the biases, because there can be data that can be biased but still good. Think about, you use a biased data model from electronic health records to create a diagnostic tool that works. The tool works, and it works for all population, even though we know that the data is coming from information bias data set. Okay, that's good. But again, it starts with how do you frame that justice question at the front end. So key points here is not all biases will result in unfairness, but again, it depends on you and how much you understand about the areas that you're working in or you're working on. And you can achieve fairness even with some of those within the system. So mitigation, we use technology and solutions a lot, but the challenge for the field is how do we bring this together? How do we make sure that everyone that is conducting AI-based research using electronic health records or similar data sets are thinking about these issues very critically, not just from checklist perspective of I've used this tool, I've checked, and it's okay. So I'll go to Rena's point where she talked about trends within the population. And like I said, we use the whole population of people with HIV since 1985 till present. The problem is, until a few years ago, nothing was ever collected about sexual orientation or gender identity. So even though we have a robust data set, their issues, right? So those are some of the things that will not show up if you just throw a bias assessment or bias instrument at this using what we traditionally do today, which is we identify, we measure, we solve, we do the metrics, we throw our models in, we throw our techniques in, class and balance, we solve it with all types of packages and stuff. It's a little bit more complicated than that and requires both human and technical solutions to come into play. And that's what we did. We borrowed the NIST social technical systems approach, and we had a conversation with almost everyone involved. We can only say almost everyone involved because we're still missing some people, but we went robust. We talked to patients, providers, end users, consumers of these algorithms to get everything we could and then come back from that perspective to start working back to all the things that we should be paying attention to from. So it's an example of some of the things we did in our qualitative interviews, talking to facilitators, barriers. We just didn't want to identify the problem. We asked them also, what will be the solution that would give you confidence in whatever algorithm we provide? And they would talk to us about it and give us kind of solutions. And so we started building that based on addressing this of the traditional things related to bias data, unfair algorithms, and how this all come into play to create distrust in those end tools that we use at the end of the day. So we're taking that and drafting this final framework that also includes the solutions, again, going back to the social technical pieces I mentioned, from the viewpoint of the consumers and building it out as a model. So take home message from this: it's complicated, it's hard, but you need to do both from the start. So that is the justice question, fairness at the start, bias assessment traditionally at the end, and working all through all of this. Now, to further complicate this, are the issues of uh, privacy and confidentiality, which we haven't brought in really, because if you anonymize data, you create another set of problems across the data science world. So just a little bit of things and information to keep in mind. And one of the things we're going to work on from this is convene a group where we come up with something at the end of the day that we can use to say everybody should look at this when using EHR records for AI. Thank you.